Happy Mental Health Awareness Week, day 2 from MindHug as we continue our sessions. We'll just wait a couple of minutes for people to get on board, but we are raring to go. We've got a great panel today. We've got a great series of questions and discussions to be had. We'll give it a minute and then we will kick off. For those dialing in, we're going to be kicking off in a couple of minutes. We're just waiting for people to come on board. Perfect. We're getting a few numbers coming in right now. Perfect. We're getting a few comments. Hello, everyone who's joining us right now. Okay. I think the numbers are increasing. I think it's probably a good time to start. Welcome, everyone. Happy Mental Health Awareness Week, day 2, as I just mentioned. We've got a great panel up ahead. As everyone knows, MindHug is a UK-based company, but one of the things we are trying to solve for is the one-size-fits-all approach that exists in mental well-being today. Even though a lot of people are working towards challenging that, it still does tend to exist. And nothing signifies that more than some of the divides we see between the developing world and the developed world. On one hand, people tend to indicate that the stigma seems to be higher in the developing world. But on the other hand, when you look at serious mental health illnesses, such as schizophrenia, the prognosis seems to be better within the developing world. So to talk about this, as well as some of the innovations that are coming up within the developing world, we have a fantastic panel today. So we have Manoj Chandran, who's the CEO of White Swan Foundation, Dr. Kamna Chhibber, who's a psychologist and the head of mental well-being at Fortis, and Bhairavi Prakash, who's the founder of Mithra Trust and is also a psychologist. Before we kick off, what I will do is just go through each panelist, and I'll allow them to give an introduction of who they are and the companies they would represent. So should we kick off? We'll probably kick off in the order of the flyer. So Manoj, do you want to go first?
Sure, Raj. Thank you so much, Raj, for having me in this panel, and looking forward to a good discussion here. And to introduce myself, I am Manoj. I am the founding CEO of an organization called White Swan Foundation, which is a not-for-profit organization we started about 6 years ago. In the mental health care space, one of the most fundamental missing links that we saw when we did our research 7 years ago was that people were largely disempowered. They were disempowered in many ways. And one of the key things that stood out for us was that they were not able to make right decisions around mental health care. It should be about their own mental health issues or that of their dear ones. And the key reason was, of course, social kind of norms, but it was also derived out of the fact that there was this near absence of knowledge they could dip into that would help them, empower them to make decisions. So with that very simple kind of mission statement, we said we would deliver knowledge so that people are able to make right decisions around mental health care. So over the last 6 years, White Swan Foundation has been focusing on this: create knowledge, deliver knowledge, and interact with people so that every single stakeholder, not just those with mental health issues and their caregivers, but even bystanders, know exactly what they should do should they be in a situation around mental health care.
Sounds great. Sounds great, Manoj. And it resonates very much so with what kind of we are trying to do at MindHug as well. So lovely to have you on board. Thank you for the introduction. Should we move on to Dr. Kamna?
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be on this platform. Thank you so much, Chitraj. And thank you for my fellow panelists as well for joining us today. So a little bit about myself. I'm a clinical psychologist. I've done my MPhil in clinical psychology, and I've been practicing as a therapist for about a pretty long time. I've been in the field for about 14 years now. And I head the Department of Mental Health at Fortis Healthcare. We recently completed about 8 years now with Fortis Healthcare, and we are a department of about 75 members who are working across 9 cities in the country. We provide a lot of clinical services, which include psychology, psychiatry, special education, occupational therapy, so the remedial services, the art-based therapies. So we're a whole, we try to provide holistic services within that space. And for us, the aim has been to make mental health a priority across the country, because like Manoj was saying, that there is a stark need for more information, more awareness, and greater acceptance of the fact that people can have and do have mental health concerns, and they do need to seek treatment. And to further that aim as a department, we've not just been looking at providing the clinical expertise around what you can do if you have certain experiences. We've also been trying to work within the preventive space, where we collaborate with schools, corporate organizations, with NGOs. We do a lot of work within these different spaces. And the idea is, like I said, making mental health a priority for all. And that's what we've been working towards.
Perfect. I think everyone is doing very, very similar things in trying to make mental well-being a priority, and I think that's great. So over to Bhairavi, if you could give us an introduction, Bhairavi.
Hi, I'm super excited to be here. I'm the founder of Mithra Trust, and Mithra means friend in Sanskrit. And the idea is to provide help and mental health information a way that a peer would, a way that a friend would. So we primarily focus on 4 areas. The first is to provide information that engages with the narrative of stigma around mental health. The second is to provide a sense of connectivity and belonging in all of the work that we do. The third is to provide self-help tools. And the fourth is to provide really safe spaces where people can express themselves and also engage in self-reflection. So we've been doing this for about 2.5 years now. We're structured as a not-for-profit, and we primarily were in Chennai and Bangalore, and now because of COVID, we're virtual. And the response that we've seen virtually to some of the work that we've been doing is incredible. Almost all of the sessions, by the time we kind of announce it, they're completely and totally filled up. So in terms of the work that we're doing and the people that we're catering to, it's usually 17 to 35. That's the sort of bracket that engage with our services.
Great. So thank you for the introduction. I guess all of you have touched upon it already. So maybe using India as an example, because obviously that's the market you all are familiar with. How is mental health perceived in India currently today, and how do you think it's changing? So should we take turns again and maybe start with Manoj, if that's okay?
Sure, Raj. So to begin with, in my view, India is such a huge nation that there's not one common trend that will apply to all the regions of the country. And so the answer to this question will depend on many aspects, such as region, community, nature of the problem, and many other factors. On one hand, of course, there's no doubt that the urban India and young Indians, these are two areas, I would say, that have seen really marked kind of shift in the perception in the positive direction on mental health care, and the way they have perceived, the way they have accepted the services over the last 5 to 6 years particularly. For instance, there's a far better acceptance of the need to reach out among the younger groups than it was a few years ago. We've also seen a lot of change in the policy levels and the way they're getting implemented. I mean, a lot of states these days are really begun. They're taking their first steps towards implementing the Mental Health Care Act. And there are some very positive aspects there. There are also some changes in the demand level. We have also seen that in some pockets, though, again, in urban pockets and in among younger communities and all. So more mental health care professionals are now available online for online consultation due to this increased demand. And therefore, there is also a lot of technology-led innovation happening. So those are the changes that are happening. But that does not, as I was pointing out, does not necessarily mean that we have covered the entire nation. Picture is still not very promising across the country. Social stigma, wrong notions, the fear, discrimination, and lack of professionals, and integration of services, large part of the population still earns for that, actually. So we would say that there is a good beginning that has happened, but we still have a huge road to cover.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. It's interesting that you've kind of separated the demand and the supply side, and I find that quite interesting. And I think you're right. There's been an increase in demand, and I think we're going to be touching upon that as we move along in the panel as well. Sorry, my camera does that once in a while, that it just flips. But okay, so that's helpful. Maybe we can move on to Kamna. Kamna, what's your kind of perception of how mental health is being perceived in India?
I think I'm going to add on to what Manoj said here. There is certainly a shift which is happening in the urban spaces. There is a greater understanding of what mental health is all about. The younger generation, the younger population is certainly more receptive to a lot of interventions and looking at and saying that, okay, yes, I have a problem and I'm willing to seek help for that problem. There is still a gap if you look at between the generations. So yes, people who would be somewhere in their 20s to 30s may be far more receptive, but as you go, higher up in terms of the age, yes, it becomes difficult, and often the younger population struggles to communicate the same with even their own parents or grandparents, for that matter. And I think one of the trends which is probably promoting greater understanding of mental health is also the amount it is being talked about in the media. And I think media is playing a very, very substantial role in doing that, which includes not just your typical print media, the radio channels, but there is also a lot of a lot of content which is being created, which is related to mental health, which is coming into mainstream media, which includes your movies, your shows. And I think that is familiarizing people with mental health concepts. It's, and putting aside debates about accuracy and how things are depicted, the fact is that it is entering conversations, it is entering the narrative within the country. And that I feel is a very, very important shift, because change will only happen if we start talking about some of these things, which is very, very essential. And I think for us, perhaps the biggest shift is that we are talking about it across different platforms in varying ways and across different populations, because like Manoj said, there is still stigma. We still have to circumvent that. There is still a large dearth of mental health professionals. And for a comparison, I'll just give you this one statistic. So India has about roughly 4,000 psychiatrists. France as a country has 10,000 psychiatrists. France is the size of Uttar Pradesh, which is a secular state, right? So that's the kind of difference you're looking at in terms of professionals. So we certainly need far many more innovative approaches, because you are, regardless of how much you're going to push for education and generating positions where professionals are getting trained, we will still not be able to make up that gap anytime soon, right?
Sure.
So this is certainly the space and the market where there is scope for a lot of innovation, and that's where we need to put a lot of our thoughts and energies, is how I would look at it.
Yeah, good. And we have a whole section on innovation coming up, so that will be great to talk about. I think moving to kind of Bhairavi, and I think Kamna's touched upon the increase in content, etc. So I'm going to ask you a two-pronged question, Bhairavi. So first is just your general perception about India. And I know you moved from the West to India, and your reasoning was there was a lot more to do in India, as well as that you were seeing a lot of change in India, and that's why you wanted to kind of move to India as well. So the question really is, what's your perception, and what do you think is the reason for this change? I know Kamna's touched upon some of that already, but it'll be useful to get your perspective as well.
Sure. I think the first thing is the reason for the move in itself. If you look at most people my age in that cohort, we had to move. There were many people who went to study psychology and allied professions. We didn't have any jobs. There was a recession, right? So we had to come back. So that actually worked out really well for India, because we brought with us this idea of, look, we spent all of this time and energy studying something that we're really excited about, and we want to do something about it. And we've kind of been chipping away at it for a few years now, and looks like the wave is here, hopefully. But in terms of change in perception, I think almost all the topics have been covered, except maybe for the cultural aspect of it. One of the biggest differences between India and the West is our society and our social structure. And if we look at the social structure and we were to break it down, it can be anything from patriarchy to whatever caste norms that are there, to whatever socioeconomic discrimination. And all of this adds a huge amount to the sort of burden and triggers and factors that affect people's mental health and well-being. And that's an area that hasn't really been studied that much. And hopefully in the coming days, there's a lot more funding towards academic and research that does, support this kind of work. So I think looking at the social structure is super important. And the second part of it is honestly just the youth of India. and again, like Manoj said, we have so many different Indias, but if you go to a college campus and you go to a college campus in any state, whether you're in the capital or you're in a tier 2 or tier 3, one of these smaller towns and cities, you kind of see a culmination of different Indias coming in and being represented there. And it all plays out in very similar ways. So Mithra was the mental health and well-being partner for India's largest youth festival. We had 30,000 kids coming in from across the country to basically have fun over a weekend, to listen to music, to watch stand-up comedy. And then we were there doing Let's Discuss the Meh sessions, which is basically, if you're feeling meh, you're not feeling okay, come have a conversation with us, right? And we had, I think, over 500, 600 conversations, which to me says that, you know what, you're sitting at a festival. This is the tent that you think is not going to be used at all. You'll probably have a few people who might want to study psychology, who are just coming to have a chat with you and talk about their future or something like that. But then you had people who had real needs who were there, in each conversation, we did it in groups. Each conversation was about 20 minutes. And we had a toolkit that we gave them called the Meh Kit. They used that, they used comic, they used art forms, and they started engaging with it, and they started having conversations with each other about why they're not doing okay. So that to me is the fact that the youth are kind of just saying, look, we've had enough. This is what's happening with us, and we want to talk about it, and we're demanding spaces. And, you know, kudos to festival promoters and like these basically under 25, because they did an incredible job by acknowledging the fact that mental health is a crucial need for the voices that they represent. So for me, I think that's the reason for the change. You just have young people going, you know what, this is enough. We want to change and challenge what's been happening till now. We're not going to be quiet about it. We are going to talk about it. And we don't really at this point care what other people are going to say about it.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. And I think the social structure point you raised is very important. I mean, at MindHug, what we've been talking about for quite a while, and I know I'm preaching to the choir over here, but the biopsychosocial model, Engels, and the biological, a lot of focus has been very much on the biological side and biomarkers so far, but actually there's the whole psychological and social side. And I know you touched upon some of the expressive and experiential activities that you did as part of your workshop, and that's what we're looking at as well, kind of the art therapy and the music therapy as a way to engage with people. So really, really interesting there. And I guess now kind of, first I should probably mention to the audience, if anyone has any questions, but just keep putting it across on the comment section. If we have time in the middle of the section, we'll get to it. Otherwise, we will answer them towards the end of the session. So by all means, start shooting away questions if you have any. So I just want to touch on something Manoj said, and Manoj, this is kind of for you. You spoke about the developments that NGOs, private organizations, and public organizations are doing, and I just want you to kind of elaborate on that, and what are some developments that you're seeing, and how are they reducing stigma?
So Raj, the interesting thing about stigma is, I mean, that we have a word stigma in English. And because White Swan's work is essentially communication and content, and we translate our content into 5 other Indian languages. We were trying to find equivalent word in other languages, and we couldn't really find. And while stigma exists, but it's very difficult for us to explain to people what exactly does it mean. There's no one word that we could use in any Indian language. So we found ourselves at crossroads to say that how do we explain? And we usually then, started explaining to them from a story perspective, from a situation perspective, to explain to people that this is how it manifests in a particular scenario, in a community, or among people. So while stigma is, it's the first topic that gets discussed around mental health care, and it's huge across the country. But it's the important aspect of stigma is that people still haven't understood what is, how do I detect it? How do I know that I have a role to play there? And how do I make sure that it does not get propagated in the environment that I have some control on? Just to pick up an example would be workplace. And that's one of the most, the one environment where people will have huge control on and can really bring in much better social controls. Yet we see a lot of social stigma around mental health and mental illnesses and all. So the interesting thing is a lot of organizations want to work and have been working on stigma. I think the need here in India at the moment is to really go to the people and explain to them that they have a role to play. and how do you really make sure that you are taking control of changing the situation, changing the environment. We initially did that. We did a lot of communication. We did ad campaign to say that let's stop stigma. And then we started speaking to people to ask them, did they understand the messaging that we had in our communication? And we found that it was not resonating well with them. They said that their usual comment would be, I think I understood what you're saying, but I don't know what to do there. And so the important thing about campaign, and there's huge number of positives that have happened around mental health care in India. And like Bhairavi and Kamna was mentioning about media writing the right things about it and really creating a lot of noise and visibility around the topic. Celebrities opening up and saying that we are going to support this cause in many ways. It's a huge positive step that we've seen in India. But I think it is important for us to go under the skin when it comes to stigma and say that here are the actionables. Here is what we have to do. What we require is a social movement. We've tried that in many ways in creating public engagement opportunities. And at the end, it is about creating an environment in every single modular aspect of our society, from family to the larger community, where we have everyone become a mental health ally.
No, that's very, the social movement. I like this whole kind of point we're getting to, that around the social movement that we're seeing, and that's clearly, it has to come from everyone if we really want to end the stigma. So I find that very interesting that you're touching upon that. So just I know we've touched upon what India is actually doing well. So there's a lot of movements and a lot of activity that India is doing that's fairly well as far as mental well-being goes. But is there any kind of low-hanging fruit that you see as people within this field that can be quick wins? So maybe Bhairavi, can you give your kind of perspective on that?
Yeah, sure. I think the first thing would be languages, and the fact that most of us in this field are trained in English and we've come from English-speaking backgrounds. Also because when we started off, psychology wasn't really something that you could make money with. So it was more of passion and more of service, and people went into teaching, or they had to like build their practice a lot and then slowly get there. Not that many seats that you could get into if you wanted to study in the country, and it's just very competitive, very tough. So the kind of people that you have in the field is not completely representative of the people that you're serving. So honestly, the low hanging fruit for me is, if you feel like you have a mental health issue, you've been through something, start speaking to your community, start rallying around it, start figuring out how you can do it, speak in your own regional language, speak to your own narrative, like own your story and see what you're doing. The second thing would be to go outside of the major cities and hubs, right? To look at tier 2 and tier 3 and start providing services there. Because I think that's a huge issue also, because as Kamna mentioned, we don't have enough practicing professionals. So telehealth and telecounseling for this has really picked up, but there hasn't really been anything done in a city's perspective. There's a lot that's done by the government with district rural mental health programs. So for instance, in Tamil Nadu, that's a really huge program that's been doing very well. But you don't really see that in the smaller towns and cities. And people then, for any specific, sort of serious treatment, they have to come to the larger cities to get treated. So I think just in terms of just awareness, initiatives, conversations, bringing people together and providing services in just your own regional language, talking to your own community. I think that's low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, no, I think the languages point is key, and I think getting community engagement, and that kind of feeds in very well into my kind of next question. And I'm not. It's not leading, so I'm not saying that this is the reason. But for Kamna, just a question. When we look at the prognosis of, say, schizophrenia, for instance, there's a lot of research. The World Health Organization has done research that shows the prognosis is actually better in developing countries than the developed world. What do you think is the reason for that? Is this purely a community-led thing, or is there something else that we're missing over here?
So I think that the whole research that you're talking about, it happened decades ago. It was pretty early research which had come in, and I think thereafter there has been even more research on that research and newer research which has happened. And I think we need to start asking ourselves the question that, one, what was the validity of the results that came in, right? And I'm a clinician and I run a lot on the basis of what is the latest which is happening. And if you look at the latest data, it somewhere actually shows that it's not necessarily a question of are developing countries doing better or are the developed countries doing better. It's actually more about which factors are better than others in promoting better mental health and recovery for mental health related illnesses. And somewhere the one aspect which does get highlighted within developing countries is that of the kind of social support that can potentially be made available. And now I use the word potentially made available only because also in developing countries, there is the one thing that we were talking about, a lot of stigma. So, which means that there are restricted conversations, and there are a lot of people who struggle to even label the fact that they are having a mental health concern. And so, a lot of people do not reach mental health services. And if you were to look at the latest survey, which was done by NIMHANS, that was, I think, 2015-16. Which looked at how much treatment is actually being sought by the people who need those treatment services. About, I think the numbers were somewhere around the 80 to 90% range where people do not get the treatment. And if you look at the world statistics, 2/3 of people who require treatment for mental health illnesses actually do not receive it, right? They do not step outside to get that help. And in fact, that's much larger in the developing countries. So there is a lot of I would say that simply saying that yes, developing countries have a better rate of recovery for illnesses like schizophrenia may not necessarily be fair. It would be a factor of one, again, are the people who are being looked at in these researches, are they the ones who have better support systems? And as a result, is that a mediating factor? Also, has there been consonance in the kind of treatment modalities which were followed in the samples? Were they really, really comparable in their entirety when those results have been reached? And honestly speaking, when papers after these researchers have evaluated these aspects, they have been fairly inconclusive.
Right.
But I do feel that social support is one of the key mediating mechanisms. And if people can step in and they can start spreading the word, like Manoj said, and like Bhairavi was saying, that it's important that we need to keep on moving to tier 2 cities, tier 3 cities, help people understand what is a mental health illness, utilize services which are available, or collaborate and look at, say, public-private partnerships where we can do more trainings and equip people who are at the grassroots level, because professionals are scarce. That's where we will actually be able to understand how effective is actually the treatment that is being given out to people who have these illnesses, I feel.
Yeah. So that's interesting. I think this whole issue around the supply of therapists being low, I think that's something that really needs to be looked at. And I think it was also a similar issue within the West many decades ago. And then they started, mental health support workers who aren't qualified doctors or psychologists, but they just come in, just to alleviate some of the pressures that would otherwise exist on the healthcare system. So is that something we are seeing in India, or do you think that is something that we should be focusing on in India?
We are seeing it. There are shifts which are happening. There are programs which are giving more training. To say, for instance, your schools are collaborating with mental health professionals, right? Because they understand that there are a lot of mental health related problems which can be identified within children as well and adolescents as well. So schools collaborate a lot. You do a lot of training programs for the teachers, the counselors who are at the school, so that they can identify a problem, they can mediate those problems. Basic counseling skills, basic psychiatric skills are being provided to general practitioners. But there is so much scope, and there are so many other services which are available. Say, for instance, you have like what had happened when we were looking at polio, right? When you had village workers who would go ahead and talk to mothers, when you've had Anganwadi workers going and talking to mothers about nutrition. That's what you need. You need people to be trained at that kind of a level so that you're able to reach a much larger segment of the population. Because right now, when you're talking about therapy, I don't think therapy is a concern for someone who's sitting in a village, right?
Yeah.
For them, like they see something which does not sound or look normal to them, they don't understand it, and they don't know how to label it, which is where your stigma emerges from, right? Because they would want to shun and dissociate from that person, and then because they also don't know what it is, they don't know who to go and see about it. So the first step is actually going to be identify the problem, recognize what it is, and then reach the right expert. The right expert could also be just a GP who is equipped to handle that concern, provide the information, and then perhaps reach the expert next, because experts are much scarce.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a good point. That's a good point. And I know you also mentioned, even in the West, 2/3 of people don't get the treatment that they actually need. And we also see another factor that 1/3 of the people who do receive treatment don't often respond to treatment, and another third need adjustments. What exactly is the reason for that, in your view?
Well, I think the whole topic of our discussion right now actually kind of fits into that answer, that there is no size fits all approach. And mental health, it's more particularly so, because there are many variables, and when we follow the biopsychosocial model, we're saying that there are biological factors which are getting mediated by how an individual thinks, right? Their cognitive processes, their personality, their temperament, the social conditions in which they are embedded, which includes not just the family, which also includes their workplaces. It includes the schools, the colleges, the friends, the neighbors that they're residing with. So there are so many intervening variables when you're looking at mental health, that it's very hard to be able to say that, this is the one treatment which would work for this individual. And I think what also happens is that, we haven't been able to reach a point where we can say this specific, medical intervention would work absolutely 100% well for this particular condition, which is where a lot of research is currently happening, which is about all the biomarkers which are being looked at, the SPECT scans which are being looked at, and that those are still under the research stages, where you will be able to undergo a test, figure out, okay, exactly what is your level of a certain neurotransmitter, and you will be able to give the right medication. But you will still have variability, because you can't do much about the psychological and the social cultural factors.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Taken care of.
Yeah, exactly. And I think on that point, sorry, I'm just going to adjust my camera here for a minute. On that point, how on the psychological and social side, how important do you think a wider choice of therapies and activities? So art therapy, music therapy, which will be targeting more around the psychological and social side. How important do you think it is to start promoting these alternative and complementary therapies?
Absolutely is. There is no doubt about it. We typically associate therapy with being conventional talk therapy. We look at CBT, we look at psychodynamics, psychoanalysis, humanistic, all different schools of thought when it comes to psychology and psychotherapy. But the other schools of thought are also extremely important. Your art therapies, music therapy, all of them have their own role to play. And a lot of them do have scientific research to back their effectiveness and efficacy. The only way to move forward in a lot of psychotherapy is that you have to look at what works best, and what works best, not according to me or you, but what works best according to research. And there is ample research which is being done, which very clearly points out that if there is condition A, B, or C, these could be the few modalities which would work well here, and we need to learn to fit it to that. Instead of trying to say that, exclusively whatever you have, just go to an art-based therapist, or just go to an analyst, or just go to a CBT expert, that does not work. But as a first point of contact in a country like India, where there is a lot of lack of awareness, I think just reaching out to any expert to talk about mental health issue is nevertheless still going to be the first step, because we're still there. The higher level understanding of what could be different ways in which we could engage with mental health services would come somewhat later, I feel.
Yeah. What about you, Bhairavi? I know you're a psychologist as well. Do you have a kind of opinion on the wider choice of therapies, art therapy, music therapy?
We've definitely seen it work. That's for sure. And I think, especially with my target age group, right, like 17 to 35, they're very excited to come in and do it. So most of the people that engage with us already have some amount of awareness about what's going on in their lives. They know that they're not okay. Some have self-diagnosed. Some are actually in therapy. But at the bottom of it all, they're all aware that they're not okay, and they're looking for different things that works for them. So some come in with stories of, we've tried 4, 5 different therapists, it hasn't worked. I want to come and do this doodling session. And we've been doing doodling online now for about 4 weeks now. And each one is packed, and they want to keep coming back for more. And then again, they're talking about, and we do small group discussions as well, like a peer discussion format. And when people come there, they're like, oh, this didn't work for me, but this is working for me. And I'm seeing how you're, weaving in art into it, or you weaving comics into it. And that's something that I understand. So it really depends on the age group that you're looking at and what they're interested in. There's been a lot, again, with art and expressive movements and kind of, and this whole wave now around mindfulness, right? So even with some of the artwork that we're doing, like with the doodles that we do, we work with this fantastic facilitator called Advaita, and she's basically brought in mindfulness to it. So she's teaching people, she's giving them a tool on how to, use this for themselves when they're feeling emotionally distressed. So how do you focus on your breathing? How do you get your thoughts? How do you start to observe your thoughts? How do you observe your emotions? All the while expressing and kind of letting it out. So I think these are the kind of things allied with therapy from a self-help perspective can go a long way in helping people, just giving them tools to deal with emotional distress in their own time.
Yeah, and that kind of links into kind of the availability of information on a lot of this. And I know, Manoj, you've done a lot of work on providing information, but just from a kind of a broad perspective, what sort of information and support do you think people are seeking about mental health in India?
Sure, Raj. So that's a very good question, because we've seen that perhaps is the most fundamental missing link. And to also in support of the points that Bhairavi and Kamna were making, just to give you 2 data points. So we have huge amount of repository, the largest in the country, and we have that in 6 languages. Of the top 5 cities that we get traffic from, 3 are non-metros. So that's very important insight. Second is 60% of the traffic comes to non-English content. So look at it. So clearly, people who may not have good access to professionals have decided to seek information and try and do something about the mental health situations they are surrounded by, be it by their own problem or that of their dear ones. So the need for knowledge and need for them to do something about their mental health issue outside of the urban cities, outside of the geographies where we have better access to services is much higher. So all those suggestions that Bhairavi and Kamna were making about the need for us to make sure that we go into many kinds of therapies, we must begin to look at how can we make sure that these training are available in non-English areas also. Now, can we create psychologists? Can we create therapists? Can we create counselors in non-English speaking geographies? And how do we do that? So I think the role of, that's an interesting insight that we've learned a lot. Can we get education system to really gear up to this huge need and demand for in the non-metro areas, in the areas where almost zero mental health professional access is available today, actually. So that's one part. From a topic that people are seeking, Raj, knowledge on, largely it is about common mental health issue, but they are also seeking information from a symptomatic point of view, because people don't know that they're suffering from, or somebody in their vicinity is suffering from depression or anxiety or OCD. They know that, okay, something around the symptoms, and they begin to come and seek information. So they come and look at our portal and go into the search button and put in a whole lot of search based on the symptoms that they know somebody is suffering from, and try and seek information on what they could do. The second area that they really want information is from a rights point of view, from a services point of view. One of the most popular pages of White Swan Foundation is how do I get my disability certificate for mental health care? Very interesting thing. People want to know, because then there are a lot of incentives available from the government side, in the education space, or from a job perspective. They want to know. So it's a huge kind of a lot of data that we have been able to really put together, because hundreds of thousands of people come and seek information and knowledge from our portal, and we've really built an insight of what goes on in the mind of a person, what kind of empowerment they're seeking, so that they're able to address from a curative perspective, from a preventive perspective, and from a promotive perspective also. They really want to help their environment also become more supportive for those with mental health care, particularly in the area of alcoholism and substance abuse.
Oh wow, that's an interesting. So no, that's interesting to know. Bhairavi, do you have anything you want to add from your perspective at Mithra Trust?
What we see people asking information for is support for themselves or support for someone they love. So in just the last week, for instance, there have been a lot of people from the queer community who are looking for help in regional languages. So that's very difficult to offer, because how do you know if these people are verified? How do you know if it's safe to send them? And if you're looking at regional languages again, how do you know if they're qualified? So there's a lot of verification that happens. And in this, there are a couple of NGOs that kind of come together and support each other and say, okay, these are like a common pool of resources, and this is how we can help. And it's also kind of timed. So again, in the work that we've been doing, we saw there were a lot of protests early on in the year because of political reasons in the country, and the youth were really engaged with it. So whether they were pro it or against it, they were still affected by it. Their mental health was still affected by it. And around that time, most of them tend to be on social media. And we found that everything on social media was triggering them, because they were either for it or against it, and very charged views of being for it or against it. And we were trying to figure out, okay, how do we kind of jump in and not add just content, but be meaningful around it? So we created a series called Calm, and we said, just submit things that make you feel calm and come back and engage with it whenever you want. In a few hours, we had hundreds, and our following isn't even that big. But that just showed how many people were looking for something engaging, that were looking for something that would, give them that sense of calm almost immediately. Yeah. So again, but that's also because the kind of people that I speak to might be different, and it's just based on Instagram, which is like one social media portal that's there, right? And the minute we start going into regional languages, so we do something called a What to Say series, and we did one on how to have supportive conversations for somebody taking their own life. Somebody's been through sexual assault, and you want to be supportive, you want to say the right things, but you don't really know what to say. So with this, what we ended up doing was we got one translated in 12 regional languages. And again, the way that kind of picked up speed and the number of people that engaged with it and saw it in a matter of a few days showed us that people are looking for really meaningful content that they can use, that they can, action on, just content to help support themselves or support other people. So that's definitely a trend that we see.
It's remarkable when I'm hearing this, because we at MindHug are trying to solve for a lot of what you already mentioned, and I find it encouraging from my standpoint, at least, because at least we know what we're doing is actually solving a lot of problems. I mean, your whole Calm activity that you spoke about, we were just having a discussion this morning about this, in fact, about having something along those lines. So I think it's remarkable that there are all these common themes between all of us. And I think that's very interesting to see. Just touching on COVID-19, the situation we find ourselves in. Manoj, I know you White Swan Foundation have done a lot of work on kind of COVID-19. How is COVID-19 impacting the mental well-being in India?
So that's the most topical thing in India and, of course, the rest of the world. And we began understanding that there is an immediate mental health impact or manifestation into the mental health space because of the COVID. And then, of course, the lockdown that followed, I think about 2 months ago. And we started reaching out to people to understand what kind of information, what kind of handholding they require. Whole lot of things came out. I mean, whole lot. So we were speaking to mental health professionals on one hand, and our audiences also. And so on one side, we see a lot of issues like increased issues, like Kamna was pointing out about anxiety, for instance. There have been issues, people have been mentioning about the fact that the moment they got to lockdown situation, none of us were prepared for that kind of a lifestyle. And whole sudden and drastic changes in lifestyle really brought in a whole lot of mental health, emotional distress to begin with. And then in some cases, it really grew into mental health issue also. So anxiety, for instance, relationship issues were there, many other kind of distresses. People were talking about depression in some cases. So what we have seen now is that people are hugely anxious about the future. Of course, because of the current situation, there's been a lot of mental health issue, but much bigger issue is about how do I prevent much bigger issues, because people just don't have any view of what the future looks like. In many ways, for instance, in several parts of the country are still under lockdown. We still don't know about when do we begin to go to office, for instance, and many other aspects. There are also some financial and economic repercussions that we are hearing. And people are reaching out to us and saying that, I think I'm going through a lot of anxiety, a lot of issues around the unpredictable nature of my immediate and medium-term future. So that's where this whole COVID-related issues. So interestingly, people are not necessarily talking about COVID as such, but what the social impact of the virus or of the whole pandemic has created in the world over. Actually, that's one area probably which has put all of us at the bottom of the pyramid and not just one section of the community, I would say.
Yeah. No, that's interesting, and I think we need to be able to adjust to all these changes as well. And with that in mind, Bhairavi, do you kind of have any views on what people should be doing and addressing some of what Manoj mentioned?
Yeah, so just adding on to what Manoj said also, we saw that there was a huge uprise in violence at home, whether it was adult on adult, adult on child, child on adult. There was just a lot of domestic violence that was happening, and also substances weren't available. So the kind of withdrawals that people went through and the coping mechanisms then were also pretty significant. So I just wanted to add those 2 points to what Manoj said. In terms of how to deal with it, honestly, it's just about how you deal with times of uncertainty. Like, no one really knows what's going to happen. Many people now, for instance, have started going back to work. Many people are scared to go out because they're like, look, you went into lockdown when the cases were like so less, and now it's so much more. So what do we do? So there's almost like this paralysis that's happening all around, where some people just want life to go back to normal, but nobody really knows what normal is. And for people with existing mental health conditions, this hasn't really been an easy time. But like Kamna was saying, they've, the ones that did seek support kind of knew who to reach out to and how to ask for help, and two, kind of knew already about their own triggers, and they could start to look at it and start to keep an eye on it. But there's a whole host of people now who are feeling emotionally distressed, who probably haven't felt that way before and don't really know, and that too not to this intensity, right? Because everything is seeming normal, everything's seeming okay, but why am I not feeling okay? And I think just to deal with that, the first thing is to acknowledge that things are not normal. So even if things seem normal, even if everything seems like it's routine and you've just been at home and you're okay and you're privileged to have that roof over your head and have food coming in, things are still not okay. The life that we've been living in India for the past 2.5 months is not okay. What we've been seeing outside in terms of the pain that people have been going through, in terms of the suffering that people have been going through, that's not okay. And it is going to impact you, because you might have been working towards things, you might have been working towards whatever future, which is not really there anymore, the goals that you were working towards. And I think dealing with that, and there was a Harvard Business Review article that came in, I think, early Feb or March, that said, hey, what you're feeling is grief. And it laid out like the beautiful, the Kubler-Ross model, and it said that what all of us are collectively going through now is grief. And that's true. So to kind of acknowledge what it is that you're going through and acknowledge your emotions. So that would be the first thing. So to acknowledge the fact that you're not okay. And once you've done it, like, what are the things that you can do? Like identifying your own triggers, understanding what are the things that are draining you, what are the things that are not making you feel good. And keeping a note of it and just doing things that are fun and joyous, that bring joy. It could be things that you did as a kid. It could be coloring. It could be just, jumping around and dancing around for a bit. But finding some way to bring that little spark of joy. I know a lot of people have taken to cooking and are sharing recipes and, whichever age group you're in, right? Whether you're cooking that cold coffee and like trying to make it look cool, or if you're doing like elaborate meals, a lot of people that have embraced this joy of feeding everybody at home and feeding themselves. So those would just be like the top three things. Just acknowledge what you're feeling, identify your triggers, and find some way to bring a little bit of joy and fun into your life.
Yeah. Now that's interesting, and that answers one of the questions that one of the listeners had, which was, given the current situation and the uncertain future of COVID, how should India's mental health community prepare for the months to come? I think your answer has pretty much answered that. So thank you for that, Bhairavi. And just moving on to now kind of new research, innovations, and data now. I know a lot of you have been working around innovation. I know, Bhairavi, you and I have spoken about it in the past as well, about innovation. So just on that. So for Kamna first, what are some of the focus areas of research about biomarkers, for instance, and what else are we seeing in terms of research?
In terms of research, if you're looking at it from a clinical perspective, I think we're looking at a lot of, you're looking at the biomarkers which are coming in, you're looking at SPECT scans. A lot of this is still in research stage, so it's going to be a while before we start seeing them actually come in to the systems. We're also looking at a lot of virtual reality models which are being tested currently for different clinical conditions, and I think that's something that is very interesting. There is some research which has shown us the effectiveness of utilizing it with things like phobia, some success even for traumatic conditions. We've also seen a lot of chatbots, which have taken over in different ways, which are acting at the moment primarily as adjuncts to treatment, in kind of providing support on the day-to-day, and not necessarily as full-fledged therapeutic support mechanisms, but they do end up assisting in many ways. We're also seeing in AI a lot of different digital support groups which have not AI. That's generally in terms of the digital platforms that we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of digital support groups which are coming in to kind of help people connect to each other and form a community, because like we know, a lot of times experiences can be sometimes similar and sometimes different for people who are going through different conditions, and it helps to even hear from someone else who may be going through that. And in India, support groups are not necessarily very, very prominent, and yet there is an urban population which seeks support groups, and we've been seeing those come up a lot on digital platforms. We're also seeing a slight shift which is happening in terms of even some diagnostic tools being looked at on digital platforms. There are various organizations which are trying to develop systems of assessment, of providing even some basic intervention services, especially which could be structured programs, like for instance in the area of behavioral problems or things, even conditions like autism, for instance, which are specific programs which can be taken on by parents, by teachers for children. And these could be one-on-one, these could be done in small group settings. So we're seeing a lot which is happening in terms of the technological digital innovations as well, which gives access to a lot of people far beyond who would be reached by individual experts. And I think that's a big positive and a great boon right now as well.
So just touching on kind of, you mentioned virtual reality and you mentioned AI as well, and you mentioned virtual reality for kind of phobias. So are we talking about basically replicating exposure therapy and using virtual reality for that?
So they've been using virtual reality for replicating exposure therapy. They've also been using virtual reality to look at mindfulness. That's also another area where mindfulness and meditative practices are being integrated into virtual reality as well. So these have been three very prominent areas in which a lot of research is happening. Because and you can use in terms of exposure therapy, you can use it as systematic desensitization, or you can use it for flooding, and it can be easily tailor-made to the requirements of the individual that you're working with. And somewhere it also takes away, so some of the articles, and even as practitioners, right, we realize that oftentimes clients may not be very happy coming in for sessions and having to go through the same routine in, say, exposure therapy or systematic desensitization again and again, and paying for those or having to pay for the sessions which almost seem the same. And when you're able to utilize, say, virtual reality programs which they can they can utilize for some of these services, it allows therapists to also move on to other areas of concern which may be operating within the individual's life, while of course monitoring this aspect of, say, a phobia or some kind of an experience that they need to deal with in which can be done with through virtual reality as well.
Yeah, and that's and we got a question. From the audience about how bots and AI can be used, and I think you've touched upon that. But do you want to kind of elaborate on bots and AI in any detail, or do you think, we still have to see the best of it?
I think what we're seeing currently is really good, because it's a very good step in acting as an adjunct. But in terms of it getting into a space where it's able to provide pure therapy, we're far way away from that, I feel. There is no denying that. I think whether you're looking at apps like, there is Wall-E, there is Wobot, there is Visa, there are lots of these programs which are out there. And in some ways there are the apps as well which guide you through, say, meditative practices. You've got Calm, Headspace, Talkspace. I think I'm messing up that name. Yeah, so you've got all of those programs which are there, but they also do not publicize themselves as being substitutes for experts. They also talk about how they are going to supplement the work which would be done by experts. So you still need that to happen, but this could act as a very good stopgap, especially when, if you go to meet a therapist or a psychiatrist, you would see them once in a week, once in 2 weeks. But in the interim, you may need some sort of a motivation, or you may need some sort of a monitoring, which can be done through these programs very easily. And it could provide some very robust data even for the clinicians who are working with you oftentimes.
No, that's very, very helpful. And I think you've touched upon data, and that's something I wanted to talk to Bhairavi about, was around data and health metrics. Bhairavi, according to you, how important do you think data science and health metrics are going to be?
I just want to add on to Kamna's point.
Yeah, sure.
We have way too many chatbots now. So please be careful in what kind of chatbot you're using. Yeah. The ones that Kamna mentioned are completely and totally tested, and you will find research and data backing it. So when you're engaging with any chatbot, just please be careful, because there are a lot of people that just create things to just get hits on pages, and it might not really be helping you. So please make sure that you use the right kind of chat.
Yeah.
So that was just the public service.
Yeah, no. It's good call. Good call. Credibility is very important.
Yeah. I think data is key. In India, one of the biggest things we are missing right now is data. And especially because socially, culturally, we're so different. With everything that we do, we need to be able to take that in before we can come up with the right kind of solution. So even something with AI, it's not going to be as representative if it doesn't have all of that data backing it and driving it. So just a small example, I saw in the comments here, there's been a couple of people who've spoken about school mental health programs. I set up a school mental health program maybe about 6-7 years back. And one of the things that I did as part of that program was to set up a student well-being check. So the idea was to just see what kind of issues are bothering the students, and to then come up with solutions for that, in addition to the school counselor and the school management. And what that data showed us is that, okay, so management thought that these could be some of the issues, but in reality, these are the issues that are happening. So that's a really small example of how data can help you. And that today is India's probably largest repository of like student information that's available. And that's well-being data, right? This isn't with kids who are part of any research study or clinical study. They're going to school, they're functioning in society, and you're kind of tracking their data all the way from 9th grade up to 12th grade, year on year. And I think having access to, one, making sure we start collecting that data, and two, doing things with that data, and making that as the basis for whatever services we offer, whatever, projects that we implement, is very, very important, because only then can you get that complex socio-cultural representation in.
Yeah, no, that's good to know. So, I mean, just as a kind of a final parting, we've spoken about innovation, we've spoken about AI, we've spoken about data. Manoj, for you, just as a parting, how important do you think innovation is going to be going forward?
So, Raj, I think Bhairavi and Kamna touched upon the innovations that we're seeing, and which are very good, I think. But largely, I think we are very early on in the innovation cycle. And it's important that India and many countries, in fact, begin to look at innovation beyond services and technology. Mental health is uniquely placed in many ways because it actually is interdisciplinary. It's not just one area. So it's extremely important that, for instance, financial experts must be part of this innovation. We need a lot of financial models to really be experimented, so that we have a much more inclusive models which goes and serves the unserved or underserved communities and regions. We need social innovation. We need a lot of social innovation again, actually, because we need to empower people. We really need every community, because everyone is a stakeholder, essentially, in mental health care. We need innovation in governance. We need innovation in the organizations, for instance. Like, for instance, if you ask us, most of the workplaces still don't know exactly what to do beyond providing free mental health care services to their employees. We're still at the very early stage in really knowing exactly what we could do from a preventive perspective. So a lot of innovation innovation has to happen in a very, very creative way and much more inclusive way. So, and this brings me to the last point about true innovation will happen when you have cross-border partnerships happening, where you have economists coming together and policymakers coming together, many other think tanks coming together, along with mental health professionals, to say that I think we really need to have a product which has not been mimic of some other healthcare space.
No, that's good, and I think what's going to be very important is managing. I know Bhairavi's touched upon it, and so have you, Manoj and Kamna, around the credibility of whatever is offered. So we need to innovate credibly. We can't just innovate for the sake of innovating. And you mentioned getting financial models in place, Manoj. You have to have something that's firstly serving the underserved markets, but at the same time being viable, especially if it's going to be a startup. So you need to get those financial models, and you need to get the partnerships with policymakers, etc., to drive all those innovations forward as well. So I think that's really important. I was just wondering, so that's kind of all I had on my agenda. If anyone wants to add anything on innovation, Bhairavi or Kamna, by all means, chip in. Otherwise, we can take some questions from the audience.
Just in terms of innovation, I think the only thing is to solve for something that you're facing. And it's just as simple as that. So I, for instance, I've had depressive episodes in the past. I always needed to understand what my triggers were, to understand self-talk, to understand what tiredness and brain fog and all of these things were. And it took me many years. It took me like 5-6 years to get like a comprehensive understanding of what it all was. And that led today to me creating a product which basically helps people to understand that. And that's come out of my own lived experience. My background is a psychologist, and my access to designers who are really excited to work with depression. And depression is, and this is just based on my experience, right? So I think it's really important for people to, when they're innovating, when they're adding on, to just look at things that haven't been done, or to just, if it's been done, make it better. And it doesn't need to be path-breaking. It doesn't need to it doesn't need to change the landscape of mental health. It doesn't need to be big. Just make whatever small contribution you can, and you have no idea how that's going to impact the lives of people. And just keep that sort of mentality in your head. So when you're looking at innovation, it doesn't need to be big. It doesn't need to be fancy. It doesn't need to be like humongous. You don't need to look at all the other people in the past who've done it and who've succeeded. Just look at what it is that really speaks to you, what you want to kind of solve for, what you have experiences with, and bring people, and you have no idea the number of lives you'll touch.
Yeah, no, that's spot on. And I think a good example is kind of Facebook. Facebook didn't do anything new, for instance. It was just doing something that was already there, but it just did it a little better. And they had a model of distribution that was just a little better. So by all means, and that resonates very much with me. The reason for MindHug is my personal experience is with mental health, and I want to kind of factor some of the learnings I have, as well as some of the research I've done since then. And we've done a lot of research as MindHug as a team, and we're just working on that research. So by all means, work on research, but always identify the problem that you're trying to solve for. It doesn't have to be a problem that isn't being solved for. You can solve for the problem. You can solve for the problem in a better way than anyone else is solving. So thank you for that. If anyone has any questions, we can take on any questions. And I know I've spoken about MindHug during this talk, so I'll share a brief video after we finish, just to give you kind of a bit of background around what MindHug is doing. So once we are live, which we're hoping we will be as a platform in a couple of months, all of you can have a try. But if there are any questions, by all means, shoot away.
While the questions come up, Raj, I think you raised an important point about credibility, and I really want to comment on that, because what we have seen is that credibility will come when you empower people to make decisions. Because if markets open up, the clear example is in our online consultation. 3-4 years back, our audiences to come to us and say that, should I go take online consulting at all? Today, they discuss about the quality of online consulting. Look at the way they have moved and matured in demanding better services. They were earlier demanding services. Now they are demanding better services. So they will eventually begin to demand quality. So this is about empowering market, and they will make sure that they demand services, they demand quality services, and they know exactly what quality means. That needs to happen there.
Yeah, and that's we as a catchphrase in MindHug, we have 4 things we're trying to deal for. One is choice, one is credibility, one is engagement, and one is affordability. So you need to factor all 4 of these elements to actually have a strategy for mental well-being that's beneficial for people. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Manoj.
Hey, Raj, I'd just like to address one of the comments here, which was about, I think, going to the astrologer and things like that.
Yeah.
In India, again, because of our social construct, well, likely, depending on how religious the family is, you're likely to go to whichever religion you're in, right? You're likely to go to your priest or to the pujari, or you're likely to go to an astrologer, some sort of faith healer. And allied healing is huge here. So even when platforms come up, speaking to credibility, people come on board as like Reiki healers and therapists, which is therapy in its own right, but it's not what. So the audience needs to understand what you really mean by therapy. And you have a yoga practitioner who's a therapist, but what is the kind of therapy you want, and who is calling themselves a therapist, right? I think that's important. So when you are looking for a therapist, what kind of therapist are you looking for? Because a physiotherapist is also a therapist. Like, what is the therapy that you're looking for? And to understand that when you go on a platform, there are other allied healers there and other allied professionals there. You need to know who you're going towards and what you're going towards. And the second is, in terms of creating allies, like Manoj said, I think a lot of work can be done with bringing these faith healers and bringing the astrologers on board, just in terms of helping them identify, especially for common mental health disorders and serious mental health disorders, identify what it looks like, and to tell them at what point they need to go and see a specialist. Because they've done this with the district rural mental health programs. They've worked a lot with the spiritual healers there. In some districts, it works better than the others. But I think in terms of allyship, when we look at it, that's a really serious part to look at, because otherwise you see people being treated really badly, and they're not given medication. They're not given, and the same thing, like if you tell them, okay, if somebody has diabetes, are you going to be doing like a past life ceremony for them, or are you going to treat the diabetes, right? Like, are you going to clear the karma from the past life? Are you going to treat that? Why can't you do both? Like, do that by all means, like, satiate whatever spiritual needs you have, but also give them the medication and get them the right kind of help that they need.
No, that's spot on. And different things work for different people. We just have to appreciate that. And it's not to say one won't work or one will work. You just need to figure out your personality and the person you are, and find the choices that resonate with you. Because we've found, and we've done a lot of research on this, greater engagement from the person actually leads to better outcomes. So just having a system where we can increase the engagement of people.
Okay.
Cool. So I don't think we've got any more questions. Thank you all for your time. Really appreciate it. I'm just going to show a quick video of MindHug and our progress today, and after that we can all call it a day. It's been a very interesting session. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I want to thank the panelists. They've given some very useful insights, and I think a lot of people will benefit from it. I'm just going to show the quick video right now for everyone who's dialed in. So that's our video, and I think it makes a lot more sense after we've had this discussion, because I think it touches upon a lot of what we've discussed on the innovations and some of the issues we've identified as well. So I think thank you for it. It's been really enlightening for me as well, because it tells us that we're doing the right things at MindHug as well. So thank you again for your time. Thank you, Bhairavi. Thank you, Manoj. Thank you, Kamna. Really appreciate you taking the time. And if anyone has any questions that they want to ask them, by all means, send me an email or send us an email, hello@mindhug.io, and we'll pass it on to the panelists. Thank you very much for your time, everyone.
Thank you, Raj.
Thanks a lot.